your command.
A base building is being damaged. Your base is under attack.
Give me orders. On station. Something is moving out there. 6. As you order. As you command. On station.
As you order. On station.
Alrighty, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Sadly, Devi won't be with us today because something came up last minute, so I'll be hosting it with Michael. Michael will probably be talking more in the next 15 to 20 minutes, so I'll be doing most of the talking. So just to run you guys through what's been going on this month and just kind of give a good little gauge, we finally got automation in. This was the week that we basically been talking about for the better part of months, up to a year, in terms of basically automation's been coming, and we finally were able to kind of get it in there, get caught up on the roadmap, and get it functional. Now is a really important time where we're like, okay, how do people like it? How does it feel? What do they want us to change? And so on and so forth, so we can refine it and polish it over the weekend going into next week. Because our goal is to basically take all the feedback and all the criticism that we're getting from people who are talking about automation, so we can wrap it up and be done with 1.2 next week, so we can start tearing out the UI. I was more optimistic that we'd be a little bit further ahead, but automation took, I think, till like the 11th hour on Thursday to get fully implemented and situated. There was a lot of moving parts, there was a lot of issues, there were things that were just breaking. We were eventually able to just kind of bring it all under control and just kind of get everything out at that point. And just to kind of run you guys through how automation works is essentially you build a civilian administration center like in the zone, and then from there you're able to basically go and click on it and tell that zone you can intake. You can now manage civilians in this zone, and based on that, you set up rules. So there's already generally a template of rules that are already set up that dictate, if you're unknown, like if we can't determine your infection status, this is the line of execution that we're going to go down. If we can confirm you're infected, this is the line we're going to go down. And if we can confirm that you're not infected, then this is the line we're going to go down. So there's three trees. Generally, how it works is that right now you're really not going to be limited in terms of when you can detect who's infected and who's not. Going into 1.3, we'll add the DNA research tree and other stuff like that to where you'll actually have to tech in to like being able to detect the virus, being able to detect carriers, and so on and so forth. But for right now, we've kind of granted all that research for free until we can get to the point of just kind of adding in some better progression there, so everything's not just available to you from the get-go. So kind of rewinding here, you can set via the automation tool, okay, I want everyone to go to the tower. And if the tower gives them a clean bill of health, then go down one of the two logical tracks. Go down the track of you're confirmed infected or not confirmed infected. And then based off of that, they'll either go into the general hold, and then that'll eventually evacuate them to the helipads. And if they are infected, you shoot them, you turn them away, or you euthanize them. So that way you kind of have like a lot of automated procedures that your soldiers will just respond to automatically. So one thing that I was thinking about doing, based off of just seeing how people have been playing, and just kind of coming up with some ideas, is they probably want to consider allowing people to designate zones as like a screening or like a starting point. Right now, the only structure they go to is the civic administration structure, but I think what would make more sense going in the future is maybe having like a guard house or something you can place down, and that kind of designates it as like whatever structure they're closest to, they'll report to, and then go to the automation. So that's one thing that I'm basically kind of debating over, is having like a checkpoint or some kind of like initial structure that can be an extension of the administration structure to kind of give you another point to process from. But I'm still debating on that, and I'm kind of curious what people are going to say, what kind of feedback we'll get from that, and just what people. Well, I'm still waiting for more people to play it because they've barely started playing it in the last like 48 hours. And then what else was there? And then again, the idea is it's going towards a direction of eventually, because right now, because you can tell who's infected and who's not, and there's not really a very high percentage of people being infected right now that are coming up to your compounds. We got to tweak those numbers more, because now that these systems are available, now we can actually send more infected people to your, because previously we don't really like infect a lot of civilians and then send them to your compound via like sending them from contaminated zones. So we got to take another look at that system going on this week and make sure that basically that is fully functional to where like you're actually going to get people that are, if they're coming from an infected zone, there's a probability they're going to actually be infected, and then that way they can be carriers, and that way your infection towers actually function. I know that about a year ago we turned down a lot of those systems in terms of basically like how often infected could how often a civilian could be a carrier, how often a civilian could just be infected on the street, because there just wasn't a lot of like systems to like manage that. And then on top of that, it was kind of frustrating because you couldn't really tell like who the threat and who wasn't. But now that we have the scanner, the hand scanner, now that we have the infection detection tower, it's like, okay, we need to look at those numbers again and consider tweaking some of them to get more out of those systems. Because the ultimate goal is what we're going to be patching either on Sunday or on Monday, is we'll be adding it to where if you keep if you keep evacuating people that are infected, they'll scuttle your ship. Your aircraft carrier will be destroyed. Everything built on it, everything on it will die. And it's after if you evacuate 100 infected civilians, your evacuations are permanently disabled for the rest of the game. And basically at that point you close off an avenue of income. The military no longer trusts you. You screwed up. and kill everyone or go kill Chelsea, but they won't allow you to evacuate anymore. So if you keep just sending people from the islands, or in the future San Francisco North, to the carrier, and you're not screening them and you're not actually checking them, eventually it'll come back on you. And right now that's like our initial number of 100. That'll be coming roughly on like Sunday to Monday, depending on how things go over the next couple of days, or roughly 24 hours. And let's see what else is going on with that. Oh yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Is we're trying to basically just ratchet those aspects up, get the automation to where it needs to be. We have a new UI that has been concepted. Now we're in the matter of just giving it some feedback, critiquing it here and there. Here, I'll post that UI in the channel and in the chat so you guys can know. Actually, I think I can just share screen. No, I can't. That's where it gets complicated. No, that won't work. Let me go ahead and grab this UI so you guys can see what's kind of we're thinking. There we go. Here's an early concept. I will save this in the channel if it's gonna play nicely. Oh god. That's always fun. I'll have to figure out a way of doing that on my phone. So there's an example of the HUD that we're kind of playing with. We're still going to be tweaking that pretty heavily going into Monday. But our goal is regardless to get the HUD where it needs to be. That's like part of it is now it's kind of added onto the whole system. Is we need to kind of like polish it up a little bit. So that'll kind of be like a way of kind of viewing like the health of a zone, kind of figuring out like you go to your civic administration structure, you click on that, and then it gives you a breakdown of that zone, what factions are in it, what kind of income are you getting from it, what do the civilians think about you, like when are they going to start rioting, when are they going to form a rebellion, and that'll kind of be that bar. So you can kind of really quickly at a glance click on a structure in a zone, see that information, and then be like, okay, cool, I'm good. Like, there's enough pros and cons coming in from the zones, kind of like in Total War, where the idea is you turn on martial law, but then you're also maintaining civic order by being in that zone, that they kind of counteract each other. So, like, if the infections start, like, expanding into that zone, then that's another negative, and then that will counteract your actually being there. So it's like that's how we're kind of playing with the idea of civilian happiness, is that it's along the ideas and pros and negatives that are kind of being added and determined dynamically based off of like factors that are affecting the zones and the civilians' way of life, essentially. Do they feel safe? Let's see here. Let me check my checklist. Oh wait, let me post that in the Discord. Let me just grab that, and that's gonna be impossible. Okay, I'll have to figure that out later. So other than that, for the month, we've been working on. Let me pull up my list. Well, the carrier scuttling, I talked about that. 100 people infected, then they destroy your carrier. Evacuations are closed off for the rest of the game. Dynamic civilian groups are finally in. I know there's a bug right now where sometimes, no matter what you do, the civilians love you. So if you go on, if you go on a genocidal killing spree, the civilian something is like fighting the system. Where like if you actively are going out and killing civilians, they never hate you for some reason. So we have a fix for that, and that'll be coming out like Sunday, Monday, in terms of basically like, so a lot of people can't actually fully experience the dynamic civilian group rebellions because, yeah, they're kind of crazy. So we have a fix for that. That is coming out soon. I went in and I also, what we did this month was we retweaked the video and the game options to make them more efficient, to get rid of the amount of clutter that we basically had in your save folders. I don't know if anyone's ever gone to your save folders for the project, but there's like a bunch of like video options and general options and audio option stuff saved there. So we got all of that out of there and we basically transferred it over to the actual proper INI file that games are supposed to use for developing on the Unreal Engine called the game user settings. So it's more of like behind the scenes change. So then that way all of the configurable vars, all the external values are kind of there. Um, Long term, we're potentially going to make a custom INI file for like custom game settings so that they're not baked into the game the way they are. So then that way, theoretically in the future, people could load and share INI file settings of like, oh, this is my insanity run for playing where like there are no juggernauts and no levies and everyone's a spitter or a standard infected or whatever. So the idea is like that poll the people made, the public one, when we pull that up in the next couple of months, when we get like everything more situated, we're gonna add some more custom game mutilators, and then we're gonna make it to where there's a custom INI file that you can share and it's overwritable, so that where you can like share that with your friends, you can share it online. It's like a mod almost. So it'll be like, hey, these are my custom game settings, and then you write a description of like this is what your goal are, this is like how you play, and then that way you could go to like whatever, like mod.io or Steam Workshop, subscribe to those, or you can just share them on Discord and be like, oh hey, like this is how you're gonna play it. Like this is like in a Resident Evil run where everyone can walk, everyone has to walk, and then there's only standard infected, and there's no like special. So like those are some of the things that we want to be able to kind of expose, and basically like that will kind of lead into like the custom INI file settings that we've kind of been figuring out how to do behind the scenes. Because during the game user settings, kind of taught myself how to do a lot of the INI file settings that are required in the engine. So now we'll be able to apply that in other aspects of gameplay to make like small little minute changes easier to like outsource. If anyone else wants to go, I kind of go in there and tweak things to their heart's content, whether it be just turning things on or off, or setting how fast people run or walk or whatever. Um, so that's another thing that we will be kind of weighing to deal with in 1.3 or to deal with it after co-op. Because the exciting part of being where we are, and then we're going to open this up to questions, because the idea of these monthly AMAs is I gave a really quick, brief update from last week's weekly, and then we'll open it up to like voice and text questions for the rest of the 30 to 40 minutes that we're here for. Um, is that basically oh god, I lost my train of thought. So yeah, that's basically it in a gist. Let me see if anyone on. Okay, let me fix that. Okay, what do you mean there's no audio on Discord? You are not heard on Discord, no audio. God damn it. Hold on, let me see if I can fix that. I'm trying to figure out why that is. Let me do a voice test. Test. I can hear myself on the mic test. I'm gonna crash my Discord and reopen it. I'm gonna assume it's gonna be a memory leak. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Um, huh. I'm gonna start the podcast. Hold on, if I know how to do that. Never a dull moment. Okay. Hey, Michael, say something. Oh, I thought I heard something. Okay, I'm gonna restart the podcast. Give me a second. Okay, any luck now or no? Okay, you can hear me now? That's bloody annoying. Okay, well, I'm assuming you guys have been following on YouTube, so you guys know what generally I've been talking about. Hopefully. That's bad. Um, okay, so anyhow, let me just kind of fix that. There we go. Okay. Um, God damn it. Alright, we're going to open it for questions in a second. But the gist of it is that we worked on automation. We got that situated. We're looking for a lot of feedback. The guard towers idea is something that I'm kind of throwing around and just kind of seeing if anyone would want it. Because if people want it, I'll push for it to try and get it in this week before we wrap up 1.2. Because the goal of this week, oh sorry, the week is over. The goal of next week is to basically be done with 1.2, and the first thing we're doing is we're ripping out the gameplay HUD and we're putting in the new one in terms of like quick switching between buildings, having basically a build queue on the top right, like in Age of Empires, being able to dock all your soldiers off screen so you can like hide them completely. Um, Having like a unit ability switch, like in World of Conflict, where if you have different unit types, you can click a little button and then you don't have to like select your heavies and select your assaults. You can click that button and it'll cycle through all your heavies in a selection. It'll cycle through your assaults in a selection. So like those kind of like quality of life changes. Um, there's a bunch on that thing. And one thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at getting the airstrikes window, not making it look like a mobile game. Because we've gotten some feedback in the past where it was like the UI and kind of how that strip comes out, and especially since we're going to be adding more in the future, is a little too like weird. So we're going to be looking at World and Conflict and Broken Arrow and a couple other games and seeing how they do their airstrike call-ins and kind of modernize that aspect of the UI. But you'll see that going into like the first or second week of next month. You'll see us like, okay, we're ripping out the HUD. We're gonna have an experimental. We want you guys in there to tell us what you think of the HUD, because it's gonna go fast. We're gonna just be hitting aspects of that 1.3 like in rapid succession. So the more you guys can test experimental and give feedback, the better. So that way we can just kind of keep rolling through that roadmap as quickly as possible. Because at the end of 1.3 is going to be co-op. And that's going to be like, we have a couple of prerequisite stuff that we have to do internally before we do co-op. Like converting over all of the units to use gas, which is basically like gameplay or is a gameplay action like something. It's like a scripting thing inside of the engine that kind of remnant in a bunch of other games use like Fortnite that allows them to basically like make gameplay ability system. It's like a framework inside of the Unreal Engine that we need to start using, because then it allows us to replicate and make a lot of aspects of the game like automated for us. It's like a framework of like applying damage or yeah, it's like complicated. But regardless, something we're going to be converting the project over to towards the end of 1.3. So then that way a lot of the replication and the co-op coding is done for us, and all we have to do is do some of the hedge cases. And then yeah, we'll get more into that as we get closer to the end of 1.3, but just know that we're planning for a lot, and we're already kind of playing other games like Stellaris' co-op mod to kind of get ideas in terms of like, oh, that's cool, maybe we should try that or whatever. Um, so we are at the 30-minute mark. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna transition over the questions on YouTube and on my headset is a pain. Okay, so this is gonna be interesting because for some reason Discord changed their API to where I can't click on the text channel, so I can't see questions. Michael, are you here yet? And he's not, so I'm lone man out. I'm gonna have to break the screen so I can read you guys' questions. Let me go ahead and show chat and just deal with it breaking. It is what it is. Okay, fun. Alright, so anyone have any questions for 1.3? What's going on in the update? Uh, you know, leave any bugs or like issues like that for the forums threads. This is not the place to be kind of bringing up bugs or issues that you're running into. I want to leave this purely to the discussion of automation, wrapping up 1.3, and just kind of going from there. So let's see what we got. As it stands right now, boat evacuations are being delayed until potentially 1.4, 1.3. It's something that I want to do, but it kind of lost its priority based off of just we've been in 1.2 for so long. We really need to work on the quality of life, the bug fixes, and just kind of getting the more core experience refined. So that's something that's going to be on my wish list and something that I'm going to want to return back to, like using airplanes to evacuate in the future. Um, let's see. Random in-game events are planned for 1.4 to 1.5. We're calling them kind of world events, where some of them will be designated towards factions and groups, and some of them will just be towards like random ones, if like a helicopter crashes, and then you have to go and basically save the crew, and you get a little bit of money or whatever. So we're kind of looking at like other open world games to kind of get inspiration and ideas, and that's kind of around the same time that we need to kind of go back and figure out what we're gonna do with the bounty system in terms of bringing that back online. But yeah, we are kind of discussing internally of like, okay, what are we going to do with that? It's just for right now, it's on the back burner. Yeah, I can hear you, Michael. Um, the carrier being the lose condition, that's an excellent question. I will be able to give you an estimate in just a moment. Let me stare at our roadmap again. So the baby step towards that happened today in development by making it where the carrier has a health bar. It only is affected by evacuation. The ticks at it, basically. Um, we have that down as, let's see, about 6, 4, 5, 6. We have that 11 items in the aircraft carrier and the winter's gameplay changes. That would be after, because how we have it is order of operations. It's going to be whatever is first on their plan going into what's last. So that's about like towards the end to the, well, it's about the, almost a little bit past the middle of 1.3 is when we're making that change. So I would roughly say about a month and a half if everything goes to plan. If I had to guess, because some of these items on these cards are like days, some of them are like hours. It just some of the like the AI ones or like the doctrine changes. That's a week. Doctrine changes are easily a week or two. Operator finalizations at least 3 days to a week. Um, but stuff like the Avenger turret and the medium multi-person guard tower, those are like 3 hours. They're already modeled and ready to go. We're just gonna dedicate the time and just put them in there and not work on anything else. Mini map revamp, that's probably like 3 hours. So like the problem is that the doctrines and the circ polish, because the doctrines and circ polish is Abrams, Bradley, it's Abrams, Bradley, VTOL, and then it's the Little Bird weapons, the Black Hawk weapons, and then it's a couple of minor changes to the doctrines and their balancing. So like that one's big on its own. So like that one's gonna be probably like towards the end of next month is what we'll be working to the middle, the end of next month. We're working on Circ Polish if there's nothing like crazy that comes out of left field, like the performance issue that kind of slapped us around last week and the week before that, where it's like there was a couple of bugs that had occurred for like spawning that made it to where the infected were going over built-in limits. And we needed a multi-thread, more aspects of the gameplay. Um, let's see, any voice questions? Or should I just stay on the text? Let's see if anything on YouTube. No questions on YouTube. Verse mode. Co-op is our first test bed for a verse mode. And then at that point, we're going to see just like how it feels. How does it work? Can we scale it up? You know, like, because co-op is going to be interesting. Because if I have my way, I'm going to have it set up so we at least are trying to test having a bunch of operators that are playing in co-op. And then you can also have 3 to 4 like RTS players that can switch between operator. So it's one of those things where we're going to be testing a lot at the end of 1.3, and it's going to be chaotic. So right now I want to test to see how far we can push the engine, and just generally like how it feels with co-op, and then we'll make that decision for versus. Because think about it this way: we got to do co-op, and then immediately after co-op, we have to do 1.4, which is going to be Pierce and Natalie, and then after them, it's going to be the world event, basically wrapping up pandemic mode, so we can go and work on the campaign for a year. Because 2024, the goal is to be working on the campaign for an entire year, nothing else. And then at that point, okay, now that we've released the campaign, we're out of early access, let's look at seeing what kind of post-launch content people want for a pandemic, for maybe expansions for the campaign itself. So it's going to kind of be like polling, talking to people, and saying like, okay, like after we finish 1.5, after we get the campaign situated, well, how do they want us to support the game in the future? What do they want to see? You know, I saw some stuff earlier in the general chat of people talking about like capturing the infected and releasing them on people and like kind of weaponizing them. You know, that's something that we had talked about internally, but it was something that we were kind of putting off into the far, far future, the wish list item now at this point, where it was going to be like, maybe that's an avenue we could go down, where it's like an evil Cirque doctrine, or like a more like darker take on Cirque, where you could do more morally questionable things to accomplish your goals. Because the infected doesn't care who is killing. You just put him in a cage, you let him go, and that right outside that compound that's been bugging you all game, or you let them go on Pierce and Natalie. It doesn't care who it's killing. It's still spreading. So in Chelsea's mind, she's still winning. So it's one of those things where we're just kind of like talking about internally, and that's like way down the line in terms of stuff that we're talking about, but we're like, that's a cool idea. We should sticky that. Come back to it in the future. Okay, so Stark Knight requested to speak. Let me go ahead and invite him up.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?
Okay, so I had an idea for the rioting at the gates idea.
Sure.
So if you were, say, I don't know, allied with the police faction, I think there should be like some sort of special ability that you can actually request the police faction to send like, I don't know, riot troopers or some police officers to keep the rioters like in a passive mode, so they don't start causing like Molotovs to go over the fence or guns to be going off. And so basically, it just keeps the peace and, until you can contain that situation before it blows out of control.
Hmm. Um, Let me think about that, because you figure the aspect we were planning on just having it where Cirque has to deal with that themselves, because that's their mandate as an institution. So like in the lore for what we're building, and we have another book that's coming out soon for this, for like Pearson, how Pearson Cirque interact, and how Cirque sees the police as a child, where it's just like, go over there, this is our problem, we're gonna deal with it, stay out of our way, hunker down, we'll call you never, is basically Cirque's approach towards the police in the book, and in terms of like the campaign that we're pushing towards, because the idea is they're the end all like solution. So let me think about that. Because that makes sense, I guess you could say, from like when we get to 1.4 for Pierce and Natalie, to give them more utility of kind of having them, where if you're kind of stretched thin, you can kind of like, hey, can you come over here and kind of deal with this? But the same problem is that I have to kind of think of all the repercussions of that, because if they're rioting because you're being a dick, then Pierce is going to hate you anyway. So it's kind of like an interesting kind of thing where it's like, let me think about that. That's a good idea on paper, but I have to think about every possible situation, and when it would be like Pierce would be, no, you're on your own. Like, why are you treating those people so horribly? You keep like the zones in red contagion. You know, we already don't like you to a certain degree because you're not really kind of helping the civilians at all. So I guess it kind of comes down to the particulars of the situation, and then if you engage Pierce to kind of do that. But let me think about that, because there's a lot of moving parts for that. But I do like the idea.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let's see what we got here for questions. What else do we have for questions? Anything good? I think I covered that question already. So when it comes to the Abrams, the Bradley, and the VTOLs, we're procrastinating on adding those as long as possible. Take as long as possible until we can do the AI at the same time, because you figure when it comes down to it, we need to make it to where the AI have proper build orders and can properly prioritize like units that require like a special counter. Like the blow up guy should probably be countering the Abrams, or like, you know, knowing the counter the striker, trying to hoard them, trying to like corral them in the spaces. So I'm pretty confident that there's going to be some hedge cases, which is why those two items are kind of relatively close to each other on the roadmap, because it's like we're going to have to tweak the AI quite a bit to get more volume from them. And my concern is going to be like, if people will turn off the Leviathan or the Juggernaut, they're going to be making the game too easy, because we're going to be balancing it based off of all of them. So if you start turning off the Juggernaut or the Leviathan, or like even when we expose other mutilators, at that point, if they turn that off, that's their problem for balance. They're clearly wanting to have fun, and they're not really caring too much about the balance of the game. So at that point, we're hands off. But if you're playing with vanilla settings on Director or on Easy mode, then we'll be balancing all of the units in terms of when they come in and how they collaborate and work off each other in terms of a synergy in that aspect. So then that way, you bring out like Abrams and you start like moving them up unsupported. They'll know. Okay, let's send some spitters to kind of like pick at him. Let's send some blow-up guys. Let's mass infect it on 2 or 3 different sides. Let's try and overrun the crew that are on the ground supporting the Abrams, or maybe you don't have a support with it. Because the idea is that the vehicles are vulnerable if you send them out by themselves, because they can get entrapped by a lot of infected. Eventually, they won't be able to go anywhere if you're running over hundreds of people. So the idea is we have a system for the vehicles where, like, every time you hit someone, it slows down the vehicle with its max speed. And based off of the mass of the vehicle, it takes more hits to bring it to a standstill when you're immobilized. So we're kind of simulating that they're kind of like getting clogged up or stuck in that location. So there'll be an incentivization of like, okay, like if I'm going to be moving vehicles out, some of them will be impervious to melee damage, so it'll take the special infected to kind of hit it. So that's going to be a change we're going to be kind of playing with in 1.3, is that standard infected can't damage like medium to heavy armor vehicles, and it takes the special ones to do it. But like company heroes, where like traditional bullets don't damage the tanks, but they damage the lightly armored ones, like the armored personnel carrier and all those. So that's kind of the direction where we want to push into, and then just kind of pushing the AI where it's like, you have an advantage right now, but now they know what you're playing, what you have in the field, they're going to start countering that, and they're going to start using strategies to make you either retreat or to try and trap you if you get too overconfident and you push too deep, and then they come behind you, they come in the sides, and they come in front of you, and they just kill you that way. So yeah, like I expect the AI card to be a huge portion of 1.3 before we're ready for co-op. I'm guesstimating a week or two, but it could be a month in its own to just make sure that the AI understand these situations and how to properly get themselves out of like dire situations, but at the same time play you in terms of like playing games. Because I want to focus a week almost on every AI archetype and get that goddamn Leviathan from stop flying in the sky. Because sometimes that Leviathan thinks he's Mary Poppins and starts flying, and we don't know why that is, but we need to focus a full week on his AI and see what we could do about, like, resolving that going into the next couple months. But yeah, because I mentioned it briefly, but like I think the blow up guy is the only one that's going to be mostly untouched, and he's just going to have a better director, a better like guiding hand above the scene to be able to tell him like go here, then go there, then wait for them here, and then blow up when they turn that corner kind of deal. Just so that they have more strategies in point, things that we're going to be looking into. So let me see, what other questions do we have? Five is requested to speak. Alright, let me pop him in. All you five.
Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Great. First off, I want to say it's really impressive when I say anyone working on an indie game. But, what I was
Thank you.
curious about is what are your plans with the factions? Because I was hoping that you would expand them to be, like, their own kind of, like, partially autonomous entity, kind of.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that because you figure after we finish 1.3, because originally we were going to do Pierce and Natalie first, and people wanted to co-op a lot more before. So we kind of pushed Pierce and Natalie off to 1.4. And when we get to 1.4, the goal is going to be to focus a couple of weeks on each faction and make them actually have a purpose for existing. So I mentioned this earlier in the AMA, but like there's a book that our writer worked on, which is basically going to kind of be like the guidebook for Pierce's group, and then we're going to have another book that comes out that's going to kind of be like the guidelines or like the rule book for Natalie. And the idea is that for Pierce, he'll start out as like it's going to be a complete change. Everything that plays for Pierce for Natalie right now is being thrown out the window in the garbage can and lit on fire. So we're going to have the police where they're the actual police. They work with paramedics. They start from a police station on the map, and then they basically kind of rush out and try and essentially, initially first, they're going to like pop up and fight the infection as they basically show up across the map. So they'll kind of help you in the early game is the idea, but eventually they'll be beaten back to where they're running low on resources, there's more infected than there are them, and then at that point, they're going to have to hunker down and start to vassalize civilian groups and try and survive by just trying to build armada, an alliance of civilians based on the idea of, like, we all work together, maybe we can get out of this. They give up on the idea For what?
I'm sorry, but if I'm understanding this, they're gonna be like one of the bigger players trying to, unite the splinter groups.
Essentially, so they'll be trying to basically ally or vassalize the other civilian groups on the map. The ones that you run into that you just kind of ignore sometimes. So the idea is that they'll ally with them and they'll kind of like stay in their initial compound and then they'll have like a group of like crack officers, like really high tier ones, but they'll rely on civilians to basically like exert strength where they don't have the manpower to always do it. Um,
Okay, yes, because I was thinking, I noticed that it's kind of annoying, like when there's an infection pop up that none of my units are near, because I'm one of those crackheads that just as soon as I unlock the attack helicopters, just my army is nothing but attack helicopters and like one token engineer.
oh, you probably need to build up more guys, but in this example, in the early game, they're going to be kind of rushing in and then eventually they're going to switch back to a more of a defensive posture because they're going to realize basically the idea is they're almost going to simulate or run a storyline where in the beginning they're trying to help everyone, they're trying to like figure out what's going on, and then towards the midpoint of the game they're gonna settle into more of like a defensive posture, and they're gonna kind of work within the confines of a story that we've kind of like a story or a script we've kind of predefined for them of like what they're trying to do. Save civilians, get them all together, and then do the whole unity thing for Pierce. And then for Natalie, she's gonna be more of like chaos, subterfuge, hiding, and just kind of sabotaging and attacking the other groups. For her, I'll have more details about her probably in the next 2 or 3 months. I have some base ideas, but we're gonna have to take a lot of experimentation because you figure she's gonna be more of like hiding in like hollowed out structures. She's going to be hiding inside of groups that are already established, and her idea is just to basically kind of work from within of like the chaos that's being going on in the zone. Um, but yeah,
Oh,
she's going to be the more
speaking of
complicated one.
chaos,
What do you think?
speaking of chaos,
Oh,
uh, I think you guys need to update the wiki
oh,
because they mentioned command trucks, and for the life of me, I cannot find command trucks in the game.
look, yeah, command
Is
trucks don't
that
exist
reasonable?
anymore. They were converted over to the socks, which is basically you build them from the engineer to increase your income. I will mention that to Kingfish, King Size, I forget his name. He's the one that basically manages that and kind of does it from a community standpoint to kind of keep that wiki updated. So let me tag him in the moderator channel. But thank you so much for your question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions. Let's see if there's anything else that we can kind of pick out of the group. Let's see. Alright, we already covered co-op, so I'll switch over here to Discord. No one else is raising their hand. Uh, well, the idea, Brick, is that essentially you can choose to help them or not. So, kind of going off of the idea for Pierce, so you can show up on day one and kill all of them, if that's what you want to do. Or you can show and help them, or you can just sit back and watch. It's kind of like another group that you're just kind of examining from a distance, and you're like, oh, I want to help them. Oh, I want to kill all of them. I want their land or whatever. So it's really up to you. They're just kind of running a predefined story of like working within like a frame set of what they're supposed to do, and then you can choose to interfere with that anytime you want. Let's see here. We got another question here. Will creatures high eventually have a creep? So, creep mechanic is something that we are still kind of experimenting with on the back end. We tried a couple of times of implementing it into the engine, but it kind of like was too expensive. It's something that we're going to come back to with the procedural generation tools that they added in 1.2. but we're still on the fence on the best time of implementing it. We might get a breakthrough in a couple weeks. We might get a breakthrough in a couple months. But eventually, the goal is going to be where we can have actual like creep and like alien biomatter on the structures, on the streets, so that way it's very clear what areas the infected own. So that, then you kind of know, like, oh wow, this is like really creepy. You're entering like another like an alien hellscape almost in terms of basically like how it's composed, how it's laid out, how it's building on the streets and all the other stuff. So that is something that we're talking about internally, and we just need to figure out if the procedural generation tools inside the engine will help us towards that, and what we can do to optimize it for the sheer size of the world that we do have. Um, let's see. Like another question. Could we lock infected circ units in the cages? My God, Shaggy, you're a horrible person. Um, I'm gonna say that's probably not possible until we add some kind of mechanic of like knocking out infected units. Because myself and Derek had talked about that previously. We even got like a special cage made for the Juggernaut and for like the other special infected that were larger. It's just a matter of there's gonna be a lot of mechanics and systems that go into making it to where you can capture them. But that's something we want to do in the future as like a wish list item. Um, for Sir Commanding Officer's question about rioting, when it comes down to it, right now, rioting is purely directed towards how do civilians feel about you as like the the force that the occupying force that's supposedly here to save them, to help them. When it comes to like interplay with factions and then riling them up, we did have some ideas of having it to where the anarchists would basically thrive on that, and they would hide in those groups to launch stealth, like launch hit and runs on you. Um, Rioting is really not going to occur for anyone else because Natalie is too obscure and hide, and that's not how she operates. Pierce is going to let them in regardless. The whole idea of Pierce is unity, bringing together as many people as possible, because that's the only chance they have of survival. And Cirque is going to be like, okay, we'll evacuate you guys, but form a line. Kind of deal. But then it also comes down to how you decide to play when you're playing a Cirque. Because you figure, like, if you're playing as a dick, they're going to riot. If you're doing a really good job and you're coining off zones, and you're kind of keeping them away from the infected, then they're not going to riot. So in that case, like other groups, like Natalie can't take advantage of it. Pierce never would, because it's just generally the fine line he draws morally. But theoretically, Natalie would when we get to that point, because we wanted to play with that idea of having it to where, they could do that. We are still doing auditions for the Zone audio. we are we're gonna be choosing some of the final voice actors probably next week. And then if I had to guess, the Zone Audio will come in absolutely last of 1.2, or in the very, very like beginning of 1.3 for the UI changes. Because we're like very picky about like the voice actors, making sure it goes through the audio engineer, so that it gets mastered, which at the right level, it has the right filters applied, and everything else. So that's gonna take probably 2 or 3 days minimum after we get all the audio delivered. But we have we have the announcer for the city nailed down. She's already been chosen. Um, and then we're still working on the writing. So actually, I'm sorry, I confused the two. If we're talking about purely just the Zone audio, we've already cast the girl, and she's already set to start like next week. If we're talking about like the writing audio, then that's gonna be bleeding over into the end of 1.2 to like the beginning of 1.3, because we're still working on getting a male version of the audio for like, so we get a one male, one female version that's kind of chanting or like rambling in those groups when they're talking. Um, but yeah, that answers that question. All right, so we have time for two more questions before we wrap this up. Let's see. Wow, I'm surprised. Nobody has that many questions at the end of the month. Uh, oh, this is a quiet AMA then. Probably all those troubleshooting audio screw ups that happen. Would it be possible civilians from other zones? You could already do that by setting an evacuation order. You could just build a civilian administration structure in two zones so that you tell one to flee to the other, and they'll automatically go to that zone, and then you turn on intake on that zone, and then they'll basically, decide what they're going to do. Well, based off of your automation rules. Uh, the limits for civilian evac automation. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that a little bit? What are the limits for civilian evac automation? Can we just store endless amounts of civvies as long as we have ground space? Are you talking about the civilian holds? So the civilian holds aren't going to gain money anymore. That was a feature that should have been removed for the evacuations, because people could just sit there and farm civilians. Because of the nature of how they're designed, they're supposed to be a way station to keep going. They're not supposed to be a permanent location for them to be housed and live in. Because if we did that, then the entire game would come to a standstill. The engine wouldn't support it, and the performance would just nosedive. At most, we can probably keep maybe 40 or 50 or 60 AI on the map at any given time for civilians, but we have to keep them flowing. We're going to keep them coming in and out, so then that way there's a flow. We're evacuating. We're keeping things moving. So the holding areas are no longer going to be you put a bunch of people into it, you farm cash. It's just going to be a way station, and only a way station for automation, holding station, evacuation. So these holding stations are basically like a way for you to secure and keep the civilians protected until the helicopter is ready to ferry them away. That's the intended purpose of the holding station now, based off of just the evolution of how the game has kind of progressed, and us kind of working around of how the engine works, and what we know we can do, what we can't do, based off of if we allowed people to just build holding stations and then just put civilians in it, it would blow up the engine. Because like you figure that's the same issue we had with the infected. That's why the mobs were designed is that like so that way we can try and save as many resources as possible, but keep the evacuations and the flow consistent. And the next series of changes that we did over the weekend from your save files that you guys have been submitting to us have kind of helped us ratchet up the efficiency and the speed at which evacuations operate. Because now we were able to see a bunch of head cases where like, oh, they did build a civilian hold here, and there's a helipad here, but sometimes they didn't properly get the call, or some other system was like pulling them in another direction. So now we're able to kind of like look at all the cases how you guys are playing it, and then address those. So now we can kind of get a series of bug fixes out on Monday or on Sunday to essentially like improve it and keep it running. Because there were some cases where the automation was like kind of pausing or halting at times, and people had to save and reload their games. I mean, that's kind of to be expected on an experimental branch. We kind of expected that to happen. But we're glad that you guys were able to catch those. We were able to catch those, and then we were able to look at those save files, evaluate them, and improve them. Um, Let's see. Is there any other questions before we wrap this up? For Tom, the Foundry minion on YouTube, I'm pretty sure we already solved that last night in a shadow patch. If we haven't, make a forums thread on Discord with a picture of a location and preferably including the mini map, and then show what's happening, what wall they think they can walk through or whatever. For your question about being able to see civilians inside the holding areas, that's an animation question. We want to do it, but it's just a matter of getting to that point. Because you figure those holding areas, in my mind, are a blockout asset. We need to kind of refine them and tweak them a little bit, because long term, I want to make it to where you can actually look in and see people sitting on the chair, relaxing, whatever. The same thing for like people getting in and out of vehicles. So I want to have it to where they actually have to get out of the vehicle or jump out of their seat when they're on the Atlas, when they're leaving the Chinook or whatever. So these are like long-term things that I want to do for like aesthetic polish that are being pushed off like right before we work on the campaign stuff, like 1.5 stuff, because like those things are nice to look at, but they won't affect gameplay. So it's like I'm trying to get all the aspects of gameplay situated, make sure the game is fun, make sure it's balanced, and then when we get around 1.5 is when we're going to start focusing on like, pushing more of the visuals and the graphics and the immersion aspects of gameplay. Move Kitty, your head's in the way. Why are Terminus watchtowers limited? Because if you allowed everyone to build unlimited towers, the game falls apart. The game becomes too easy. And then it's also a performance consideration. We used to have turrets and watchtowers unlimited, but then we'd load up save files with 500 of them in. The infected never walked 5 feet without dying. Then the frame rate was so bad that you couldn't even play. Because guard towers, turrets, they're people. They can hear and they can see. So based off of that, they're an extension of another unit on Cirque that you're building that now has a constant cost of, do I see someone? Do I hear someone? And then you factor in the balance implications in terms of like, how do the infected counter 500 turrets? Oh, send more people. But then now you're going over the limits that the game performance-wise can maintain a sustainable frame rate. The whole game falls apart. So we had to limit turrets and guard towers, and obviously the infected have spawn limits as well, otherwise they would blow up people's computers. So we had to kind of limit those two to kind of find a balance in terms of how they all operate and go off each other. And it's very possible we'll increase those limits as we kind of find more workarounds of reducing the cost of characters. Like, we do it gradually, but it's kind of like, at the same time, we have to kind of be mindful of the changes of doing this now affects the infected, and how do they counter you now. Because, I mean, man, I opened some save files, and they were, like, literally World War I, like, turrets, lines across an entire, like, area. And it was to the point where, like, nobody was going to break. No one's breaking through this. It's just not possible anymore. And then the frame rate's like 10. Because every time the infected do attack, they get mowed down, and every single turret is seeing every single person on the field, and it just falls apart. Let's see. Well, turrets are going to end up being pets and minions to the engineer. So just letting you know, let's say 3 5s. 5 is that long term, the turrets that you guys build are going bye-bye. We're adding prototype level of turrets where they're really big, chunky boys that you build, kind of like the ones that you see on aircraft carriers. And though, like a missile version and like a traditional, like bullet version. And then the turrets, the missile turret and like the standard sentry turret are going to be deployable minions for the engineer that basically they're like the throwaway units. You ever seen Aliens? Where they have like those little like turrets they kind of set up in the field? That was originally what the turrets were supposed to be. When they were supposed to be fire and forget minion turrets for the engineer to support quick advances, to cover up flanks, and then you move in there, and you build heavier turrets, and then you replace those baby turrets, with the heavier ones, and then you use the cooldown that comes down to build more minion turrets for the engineer. So realistically, this change will have to come in 1.3, now that I'm thinking about it, is that we're going to basically have to figure out what we're going to do with the engineer, figure out what we're going to do with the turrets, and then add the chunkier boy turrets. Kind of think of the turrets from Prototype, where they're basically the size of a striker, and they're just a fixed emplacement, like a huge gun on top. So that's generally the direction we're going into for turrets and for the engineers. If you hear a cat meowing, it's because there's a cat next to my microphone. Sorry. The mortar is going to be given auto in 1.3. The mortar is getting a total revamp. It's going to use AmA. The AmA is going to be expensive. It's going to auto target. It's going to have an actual proper auto targeting, so you don't have to babysit it. And then we'll go from there and see how that feels, because the mortar is still goddamn broken right now.
We got time for one more.
Okay, and then the last question will be... I'll take two, actually, because there's two good questions here. So for the quality of life question about patrol AI capable of pursuing a target, that's not planned. The patrol is going to be to the extent of they're allowed to leave a certain distance away from their patrol, and then they go back to their patrol. I know that to kind of add to that in 1.3, we're going to be adding it to where vehicles and helicopters are conscious of their gas. So when they're on patrol, they'll go back and refill automatically. Because that's just, they kill themselves. If you put a helicopter on a patrol forever, eventually he'll kill himself. Because he never goes back for ammo. I'm sorry, health. It's like gas. So you have to be conscious of that. So that's one of the things I want to do there. And then the last question I was going to take is bunkers. We experimented with bunkers right before we released it in early access, and I think we even had a bunker on our early access. We had a fence netted compound that you could build, and then you could put units inside of it. But it wasn't garrisonable. It was you put people inside of it, and then it was almost like a sandbag that had an entrance that you went in. A pillbox. We had a pillbox that you could build. We experimented with that. It's something that we want to come back to doing. I guess it really comes down to if there's enough demand for it, because we want to do battlements for the towers. Not towers. We want to do battlements for the walls. And we wanted to look into pillboxes or some kind of bunker that makes sense for what we're fighting for, the Cirque. If we're going to do that in the foreseeable future, it's going to be when we do the doctrine changes. If it's not done then, at that point, then it would most likely be in 1.5, if I had to guess, which is quite a ways down the road. So I'll put it on a wish list. I'll keep it in the back of my mind. I'll talk to some of our artists, because I think the first thing on our agenda is adding battlements, so you can actually walk on top of your walls, your perimeters, and you can have units on top of them shooting instead of them being behind it. And then from there, we'll look into seeing if we can test and figure out how to make that work for having some kind of bunker or pillbox design. Cause I'm not against it. It's just I gotta figure out way to fit that in there if we're gonna try, because we already have a lot to do for doctrines and all that. And the thing about 1.3 is for me to keep on schedule and try and have co-op by the end of the year. I can't keep adding stuff constantly. To a certain degree, we're gonna have to keep within the confines of what we already have planned for 1.3, budge a little bit, so then that way we can try and get co-op out by Christmas, by October. But it's gonna kind of just depend, so it's to some degree, some of these ideas are great, and I might have to be we're gonna have to save that for 1.4, or sorry, 1.5 or something, because I want to get co-op out, get that situated, let you guys experience and play that for a while, and then we can come back to some of these ideas. So keep in mind, if I just miss an idea or I'm just like, I'm not sure, part of it is because we are on a tight schedule for 1.3. More tight than any other version before previously. 1.4, 1.2, sorry, 1.1, 1.2, just any other roadmaps. Because our goal is to get co-op out by the end of the year. And we're going to need to get it out and then have probably 2 or 3 months of testing in its own to find bugs and replication issues and all that. So there's a lot of moving parts when we enter 1.3. So if I sound like I'm being like maybe, it's because I know I have to just blow through 1.3 for the rest of the stuff. Get the AI, because AI is what's keeping our programmers like awake at night, because we know that's going to take a while. And then everything else in that roadmap is just, it's trivial. It's like we can do it. It'll take a little bit of time, but it's nowhere near as complicated that's going to be required for the AI aspect. So it's like we want to get to that and then see where we are, and then we'll be able to give a better estimate of like, okay, we're starting co-op. We'll maybe have something out in like X, Y, and Z. But our goal is to try and burn as quickly through that roadmap so we can get the AI, and then the rest will just kind of fall into place. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up from there. Thank you guys for coming to this month's monthly AMA. Sorry for all the technical difficulties we had with the audio. In the next time we'll have hopefully Duravar here, and basically just he'll kind of help mediate and kind of get things on there. And then the next time we meet will be next Saturday. It'll be a weekly dev roundup, where it's basically we just talk about what we did that week, basically. So like it'll be from Monday until that Saturday. What's changed? What's going on? Where are we on the UI? Where are we on automation? And then exciting news of like whatever we're gonna be like showing off next week for like potentially 1.3 stuff. So again, thank you guys for coming. If you guys want to support development, check out our Patreon, check out our merch store, or maybe consider buying one of our support like camo packs that we did for the vehicles on the Steam store. Those would generally always be on discount every once in a while on Steam, so maybe look into that if that interests you. And thanks again.